Alright, I think we're going to finish the sixth chapter of Over Sea Under Stone. Don't hold me to that. The kids have figured out that what they thought was a map was actually a drawing of the headland that they're sitting at, which means they hope that it will be easy to find this grail that has been marked with the life deeds of King Arthur. We now know for a fact that the Withers are agents of evil. Great Uncle Mary has told them so, and we'll continue from there. Well, come on, Barney said, glowing with excitement at what he had discovered. We know where he started from. How do we find out where he went from here? Look at the picture. There's a sort of blotch marked on this headland. There are blotches all over the place. Half of them are blots, and the rest of them are dirt marks. The marks of age, Great Uncle Mary said sepulchrally. No, but this one's intentional, Simon persisted. Right here where, gosh, it must be that rock you're leaning on, Gummery. His great-uncle looked round critically. Well, it's possible, I suppose. Yes, indeed, it's possible. A natural outcropping, I think, not erected by the hands of men. Barney got up and trotted all round the rock, gazing closely at its yellow lichened scars and every small crevice and cleft, but noticing nothing unusual. It looks very ordinary, he said in disappointment, reappearing at the other side. Jane burst out laughing. You look just like Rufus, sniffing along after a rabbit, and then finding there's nothing there after all. Barney slapped his knee. I knew we should have brought Rufus. He'd have been terrifically useful on a hunt, sniffing things out. You can't sniff things out when they've been hidden for centuries, idiot. I don't see why not. You wait, I'll bet he'll help. Not a hope. Where is he, anyway? Was Mrs. Polk shut up somewhere, I suppose, poor thing? You know, Father said he wouldn't have him in the house any more when he got in a rage the other night. Mrs. Polk takes him home every evening. If she hadn't taken him home yesterday evening, he might have caught the burglars. Gosh, so he would. There was a moment's silence as they all digested the thought. I don't trust Mrs. Polk, Jane said darkly. Well, don't worry about it, Great Uncle Mary said easily. From what I know of that dog, he'd just have licked their hands and told them to go away. He doesn't like Mr. Withers, Barney said. He came to meet us wagging his tail when we came off the boat yesterday, but when he saw Mr. Withers, his tail went right down and he barked. We all laughed about it at the time, he added thoughtfully. Well, we'll bring him tomorrow. But we shall have to go home soon, and we still aren't any nearer to the beginning. Gummery, could this rock really mean something? Simon rubbed its grey surface doubtfully. Perhaps it's in line with something, Jane said hopefully, like a compass bearing. Look on the map, I mean the picture. Doesn't help, it could be in line with any of those blotches. Well then, we ought to find out where the blotches are and go see if there's anything near one of them. But that would take months. Oh! Barney stamped his foot with impatience. This is awful. What are we going to do? Leave it, Great Uncle Mary said unexpectedly. Leave it? They all stared at him. Leave it until tomorrow. Come to it with fresh minds. We haven't much time, and it's going to be a race to the end. But we're all right at the moment. The other side don't know that we've found anything. They watch me like hawks, but they don't suspect you. And with any luck, they won't. You can afford to go away and think about it for tonight. Won't they come back and burgle us again? Jane said nervously. They wouldn't dare. No, that was a long shot. They staked everything on being able to find a clue the first time, and they failed. They'll try something different now. I wish we knew what. Great Uncle Mary, Simon said, why can't we tell the police it was them? Then they wouldn't be able to come after us at all. Yes, Jane said eagerly. Why not? We can't, possibly, Barney said with conviction. Why not? I don't know. They looked at Great Uncle Mary. He said noncommittally, Why don't you tell the police that you thought you knew what the burglars had been after? Or why didn't you tell the police that you thought you knew what the burglars had been after? Well, they would have laughed. They'd have thought it was just an old bit of paper. And if we'd gone to them, it wouldn't have been a secret anymore, and we shouldn't have been able to follow up the map. And anyway, Jane said, with a turn to her old guiltiness, We haven't told Mother and Father about finding it in the first place. Well, Great-Uncle Mary said, you would have said to them, we found an old parchment in the attic, and we think that's what the burglars were looking for when they turned the house upside down, and our worthy sergeant, who is satisfied that the culprits were just hooligans, would have smiled indulgently and told you to go away and play. That's right, that's just it, that's why we didn't, Great-Uncle Mary smiled. Now I could go to him and say this manuscript is a clue to a kind of ancient cup called a grail that is hidden in Trewisic. It tells the real story of King Arthur, the man from the yacht called the Lady Mary Wantsit, and he burgled the house, and he has me followed night and day to discover if I have found it before him. And what would happen? They'd go and arrest Mr. Withers, Simon said hopefully, but he sounded less convinced than before. The sergeant would go to Mr. Withers, who would of course have a perfect alibi for the night of the burglary, and he would question him rather apologetically about my odd-sounding story. Mr. Withers would impress him as a courteous and gentlemanly antique dealer on a harmless holiday with his pretty sister. That's what we thought he was, Barney pointed out. The sergeant knows of me, Great-Uncle Mary went on, and knows I do things that sometimes seem, he chuckled, eccentric. He would think things over, and he'd say to himself, poor old professor, 'tis all been too much for un at last. All that book-learning, tired and natural it to have turned the poor chap's head. You do it even better than Simon, Jane said admiringly. I see now, Simon said. It would just sound fantastic. And if we told the sergeant about Mr. Withers and his sister asking questions about old books, it would just seem perfectly normal to him and not suspicious at all. He looked up and grinned. Of course we couldn't possibly tell them. Sorry, I didn't think. Well, you must think now, and seriously, Great-Uncle Mary said, turning his grave dark eyes on each face in turn. I'm going to say something I shan't say again. You may think the same as the sergeant would, that this is all a business of private rivalry. An old professor and a book collector, both intent on beating the other to something that doesn't matter much to anyone else anyway. No, of course not. It's much more than that, Jane said impulsively. I've got a feeling. Well, if you all have a feeling, if you understand just a little of things I was trying to say earlier on, then that's more than enough. But I am not happy about having the three of you mixed up in this at all, and I should be even less happy if I thought you didn't have any idea of what you were doing. You make it sound fearfully serious, Simon said curiously. So it is. I worry because I can only be on the edge all the time, acting as decoy, making them think they have nobody to bother about except me, so that you are left all on your own, with the responsibility of unraveling this. He touched the manuscript in Simon's hand, step by difficult step. Smashing, Barney said happily. Simon glanced at his brother and sister and drew himself up, trying to look as dignified as it is possible to look in shorts and sandals. Well, I'm the eldest. Only by 11 months, said Jane. Well, I am anyway, and I'm responsible for you two, and I ought to be spokesman, and... He floundered and then gave up all attempt at dignity in a rush. And honestly, Gummery, we do know what we're doing. In a way, it is a kind of a quest, like Barney said. It isn't as if we're all together on our own. All right, Great-Uncle Mary said. It's a bargain, and he shook hands solemnly with each of them. Everyone looked at everyone else, wide-eyed and a little breathless, and they all suddenly felt rather foolish and burst out laughing. But behind the laughter, they were dimly aware of a new kind of comforting closeness in the face of possible danger. When they packed up and were starting down the hill, Great-Uncle Mary said, stopping them in their tracks, "Take a good look at it first." He swept his arm out over the harbor, the cliffs, and the sea. "Take the real picture back with you, too. Learn what it looks like." They looked across the slopes once more. The sun was setting down in the westward sky over Kamar Head, and the grey house sliding the top of the headland and the strange grey rocks that pricked the skyline. But the harbor was already darkening into shadow. As they looked, the sun seemed gradually to fall, until the unbearable brightness of it was over the outlined fingers of the group of standing stones, and the stones themselves became invisible in the blaze. And that's the end of chapter 6.